The PS6 isn't something Sony is thinking about anymore. It's something they're already building, quietly, methodically. And January is the moment where it all starts becoming real. This is the phase where early engineering samples begin, where developers stop guessing and finally get hardware they can actually test, where Sony can start shaping the experience instead of theorizing about it. And if the current reporting holds, that lines up with a targeted holiday 2027 release window. Extraction shooters are getting harsher, not friendlier. Developers are actively making their worlds more hostile, more punishing, more uncomfortable on purpose. Consoles are creeping toward prices we've never had to seriously think about before. Memory costs are exploding. Hardware manufacturing is getting messy. And yet at the same time, some of the most ambitious tech we've ever seen is quietly being built behind the scenes. You've got games like Marathon and Arc Raiders leaning hard into risk, tension, and survival, basically daring players to keep up. You've got studios rethinking what challenge actually means instead of just inflating numbers. And then looming over all of it, you've got the next generation of hardware starting to take shape. So today, we're connecting all of it. Why challenge is coming back in games, why next-gen consoles are getting more complicated and more expensive, and why the PS6 might end up shocking the industry, not by being the loudest box in the room, but by being the smartest. Let's get into it.
Did some jumping around, the classics. It's what I do. Everywhere I went looked strange and weirdly unfinished. And that's when I found it. And everything changed. Literally.
All right, let's talk about this one. Because on paper, it sounds insane. Mascot platformers are back, but not in the Saturday morning cartoon, collect coins, jump on enemies way. Bradley the Badger is doing something way weirder. And honestly, way smarter. This game showed up at the Game Awards and immediately throws you off balance. It's part game, part live action, very much in that Who Framed Roger Rabbit lane, where you're constantly asking yourself, wait, am I watching a movie or playing a game right now? And that's intentional. Bradley isn't just some cute mascot. He's framed as a washed-up video game character, a former star of a once popular franchise who's now bouncing through parody worlds that are clearly poking fun at modern gaming culture. You've got Badgerborn, Cyber Badger, The Last Badger. You already know exactly what those are riffing on. Bloodborne, Cyberpunk 2077, The Last of Us. It's satire, but it's also weirdly affectionate. And here's the wild part. Bradley is played by Evan Peters, like actual Evan Peters. Live action segments, voice acting, the whole thing. He's not just a voice in a booth, he's part of the presentation. The game leans hard into that blend of real actor and digital character, which already tells you this isn't trying to be safe. Now, the core mechanic is where this really gets interesting. Instead of just giving you gadgets or abilities, the game hands you something called the kit. Think of it as developer powers inside the game world. You can mess with unfinished assets, change scale, flip gravity, manipulate objects like you're inside a level editor that accidentally got shipped with the game. So puzzles aren't about finding the one correct solution. They're about breaking the rules. If something feels wrong or unfinished, that's the point. You're supposed to exploit it. That alone puts Bradley the Badger in a totally different lane from most action-adventure games. But they didn't stop there. Alongside all this high-tech, fourth wall breaking stuff, Bradley also carries a frying pan. Just a normal, dumb, physical frying pan. You bonk enemies with it. That contrast is deliberate. On one hand, you're literally bending reality like a developer. On the other, you're still doing classic old-school combat. And that ties directly into the studio behind it. Day 4 Night Studios is made up of former AAA developers. People who worked on Red Dead Redemption and Mario plus Rabbids. These are devs who've lived through crunch, doubt, success, failure, all of it. And the story is clearly pulling from that. The creators straight up say this is both a love letter to games and a satire of the industry itself, the insecurity, the burnout, the joy of building worlds anyway. That's why this doesn't feel cynical. It feels honest. It's poking fun at prestige games, at trends, at mascots being forgotten. But it's also clearly made by people who genuinely love this medium and want to mess with it, not tear it down. Right now, Bradley the Badger is confirmed for PC via Steam, with the studio openly saying they're exploring consoles. And honestly, if this lands, I'd be shocked if it stays PC only. This feels like one of those left field titles that could either completely flop or become a cult classic everyone talks about 3 years later.
Players want more challenge. The whole point of an extraction shooter is that you're challenged to even survive in this world.
We heard loud and clear from the alpha, the world didn't feel dangerous. The world didn't feel lived in.
Tau Ceti 4 to us is this place that really doesn't want you there. And that sort of survival narrative really fits really well with the kind of world that we're creating.
The world needs to feel like there is something sinister underneath the surface, even when the colors are really bright.
You should not be here.
We want to marry the classic Bungie game feel, where you are blasting stuff in the face and it feels amazing, with the sort of high tension of the survival genre.
If you want good loot, you have to go to places where you're taking risks, either risks from other players or risks from AI.
So we have all these tools now, Rook with Prox Chat and the way the game works and sort of how tense it is. I think all those things work together really well.
See ya.
You have another Rook. Come on, stop. No. Sorry.
This is Bungie basically explaining their entire philosophy for Marathon and why they're doubling down on danger, tension, and making players uncomfortable on purpose. Let's start with the core problem they identified right away. Players wanted more challenge, straight up. During the alpha, people were telling Bungie the world didn't feel dangerous enough. It didn't feel lived in. And for an extraction shooter, that's basically a death sentence, because the whole point of this genre is that survival itself is the challenge. You're not supposed to feel safe. You're not supposed to feel welcome. You're not supposed to feel powerful all the time. Tau Ceti 4, in Bungie's words, is a place that does not want you there. That's the survival narrative they're building everything around, even when the world looks bright and colorful. There's something wrong under the surface. The vibe is basically, you should not be here, and that tension feeds directly into how Marathon actually plays. This isn't a power fantasy. You're not a god slayer. You're not special. You're a runner, a bio-cybernetic mercenary who literally abandoned their human body to jack into a biosynthetic shell for one reason only: money. You are disposable. You will live. You will die. Over and over again. You drop into Tau Ceti to scavenge what's left behind after something catastrophic wiped everyone out. And that absence matters just as much as what's still there, because the ruins, the loot, the factions, even the enemies, they're all leftovers from a failure of human ambition. And extraction gameplay is where all of that clicks. There are quiet moments where you're listening. Did I hear footsteps? Was that a gunshot? Did AI just aggro somewhere nearby? And then, the second something kicks off, it's chaos. Loud, messy, terrifying chaos. Other players are the biggest threat because they don't behave logically. They lie. They bait you. They pretend to team up and then stab you in the back. Sometimes, the best loot box in the entire run is another player you just killed. You can play in a crew with friends or randoms. You can go solo, and solo is where things get spicy. You still have Prox Chat, so you can talk, negotiate, fake alliances, but there's no safety net. You're gambling every interaction. Bungie straight up describes being good at Marathon as playing poker with guns, knowing when to push, when to fold, and when to pull the trigger. Now visually, Bungie knew they had to sell danger. They leaned into grit, darkness, and groundedness without losing that Marathon sci-fi identity. Materials respond to light, mud sticks, water cools surfaces. Weather finally feels like weather. Sunny areas feel warm and bleached. Rain changes visibility. The world reacts to you. And then there's one of the smartest details they added. Bodies don't disappear, they decay. If you walk into a room and see pristine corpses, you know someone is nearby. You are not safe. If everything's just messy goop, the danger probably passed. That alone turns environmental storytelling into gameplay. Audio does the rest. Footsteps tell you everything. Distance, elevation, surface type. If you're experienced, you'll know exactly where someone is, just by sound. Music isn't constant. It creeps in to reinforce tension, not drown out information. Bungie's goal is simple. When the controller disappears and the screen fades away, you're fully immersed. Now let's talk zones, because the maps are basically characters. There are 4 major zones, and each one teaches you something different. different. Perimeter is where you start. It's more open, more forgiving, but make no mistake, you're still going to die. A lot. UESC enemies here are not pushovers. They float, they spark, they feel haunted, almost possessed. Color coding tells you threat levels. Dark blue elites, lilac mini-bosses, red for bosses that will ruin your run. Then you move into Dire Marsh, where things get worse. This is where you start seeing signs that something went very wrong. There's an alien anomaly erupting from the ground. The map is dense, overlapping, and chaotic. It's great for farming, but it's also where runs spiral out of control fast. Dynamic events can trigger that completely change your priorities. Do you risk it or do you bail? Outpost is pure pressure. Smaller map, more vertical, packed with UESC presence, drones overhead, tripwires, weather hazards. And at the center is the pinwheel, a corkscrewed nightmare structure loaded with some of the best loot in the game. It's loud. Everyone knows when you're there. Nothing is free. And hovering above all of this, literally, is the Marathon ship, always in the skybox. A reminder of why this place exists and that something went horribly wrong. Which brings us to the endgame, the Cryo Archive, the Marathon ship itself. This is the hardest content in the game. A heist, cold, hostile, brutal. You're forced into player encounters. You face every environmental threat you've learned to survive. High-tier UESC units everywhere. And the deeper you go, the more dangerous it gets. That final vault holds the best loot and the biggest story revelations. And at some point, you start wondering, are the UESC there to keep you out or to keep something else in? Loot is where Marathon goes absolutely insane. Hundreds of implants, runner cores, over 400 weapon mods. Discoverability is the game, figuring out what exists, how it stacks, and how to break it. Mods can radically change weapons, turn an SMG into a Needler-style monster, give a sidearm a suppressor that turns you invisible on kills, stack invisibility builds, stack tank builds, stack chaos. Runner shells define your archetype, tank, rat, hunter, and cores and implants mold that into something personal. You can completely change how a shell plays based on your loadout. And if you're broke or don't want to risk anything, that's where Rook comes in. A prototype shell. Drop into ongoing matches with limited gear. Risk nothing. Grab what you can and get out. It's Bungie's way of letting players recover without removing tension. Then you've got factions. Traxxas, the megacorp with infinite money. Arachne, a literal death cult that just wants you killing other runners. Mida, pure destruction, explosions, chaos. Each faction has contracts, upgrade trees, and permanent seasonal stat bonuses. Hit their capstones and you're accessing the best gear in the game. All of this feeds into the codex. Lore, audio logs, collectibles, cosmetics, titles. From your first steps on Tau Ceti 4 to becoming a vidmaster, taking on extreme challenges. And Bungie's message at the end is clear. Marathon still feels amazing to play. The gunplay is there. The sci-fi lore is deep. The tension is real. Everything has to work together perfectly. Animation, sound, art, systems. Because when it does, you stop thinking about inputs and start surviving. Marathon is coming March 2026. And the tagline says it all. Death is the first step. So let me ask you, is this the extraction shooter that finally clicks for you? Or is Bungie playing a dangerous game trying to satisfy hardcore players without scaring everyone else off? Outside, Dark Raiders just dropped its second major update, Cold Snap, and yeah, this one actually changes how the game feels moment to moment, not just what you're wearing. On the surface, Cold Snap looks like a seasonal update. Snow, winter vibes, cosmetics, events. But once you actually dig in, this is Embark quietly cranking the tension knob way up. Let's start with the big picture. Cold Snap brings snow-covered maps, new survival mechanics, a new raider deck, a limited time event, a new long-term project, and the game's first ever expedition reset. Some of this sticks around forever. Some of it absolutely does not. And that's where people need to pay attention. First up, the Goalie Raider deck. This is the second raider deck since launch, and it drops December 26th. Just like the first one, it's completely free. No real money required. You unlock everything using creds, which you earn through daily feats. Think Battle Pass energy, but without the usual live service nonsense. And here's the key detail people keep missing. This raider deck is permanent. It's not disappearing in 30 or 60 days. You can unlock it at your own pace, no pressure. Whether Embark keeps doing this forever is still unclear, but right now, this is one of the most consumer-friendly systems in the genre. The deck itself includes a hockey-inspired outfit, a bunch of cosmetics, and even some useful in-game items that actually help you during raids. It's not just fluff. Now let's talk about why this update is called Cold Snap. Snowfall is a brand new map condition, and it completely changes how Arc Raiders plays. Snowfall covers maps like Dam Battlegrounds, Buried City, Spaceport, and Blue Gate in thick snow. Visibility drops hard, sightlines disappear, you feel exposed constantly, and that alone would be enough to make runs more stressful. But then Embark went further. Your footsteps leave tracks in the snow. Other raiders can literally hunt you by following where you've been. Every decision you make topside becomes readable. You can't just sprint everywhere anymore without thinking. And then there's Frostbite. Yes, Frostbite is now a real mechanic. Stay exposed too long in snowfall conditions and your health slowly drains. No gunfight required. The environment itself is trying to kill you. The solution is shelter. You have to move indoors to warm up, which sounds simple until you realize every other squad is doing the exact same thing. Suddenly, safe spaces become conflict zones. You're either negotiating, ambushing, or getting ambushed. Cold Snap quietly turns Arc Raiders into a survival horror game when the weather hits. Next up is the Flickering Flames event. This one is automatic. If you log in, you're enrolled, as long as you've played at least 5 matches total. The event has up to 25 rewards, and progression is tied to merits. Merits are earned just by gaining XP, kill enemies, complete objectives, survive, extract. It all counts. When you return to Speranza, those merits cash in for gear, cosmetics, and raider tokens, which is the premium currency. If you play regularly, you'll finish this track without even trying. If you want to speedrun it, just focus on high XP enemies like Bastions, Bombardiers, Leapers, and Rocketeers. Then there's the Candleberry Banquet project. This is the second major project Arc Raiders has added so far, and it's more narrative-focused. You're hunting candleberries and other unique items across 5 stages. Every stage unlocks a new scene at the banquet table in Speranza, plus cosmetics, raider tokens, and extra rewards. And here's the nice synergy. Completing these stages also earns merits, which feeds directly into Flickering Flames. So progress in one system helps the other. Now for the controversial part. The first expedition reset. From December 17th to December 23rd, players who meet the requirements can send their raider away on an expedition and start fresh. This is a full wipe for that character. Blueprints, levels, quests, upgrades, credits, all gone. Why would anyone do that? Because the bonuses are real. Permanent bonuses include up to 5 skill points, 12 extra stash spaces, a special expedition icon, and exclusive cosmetics like the janitor cap for Scrappy and the patchwork raider outfit. Then there are temporary bonuses like more Scrappy materials, increased XP, and cheaper repairs. But the real chase item is those permanent skill points. You earn 1 permanent skill point for every 1 million credits you have when you ship your raider off. To get all 5, you need 5 million credits. That's not casual play, that's commitment. And here's the timer. You have until December 22nd to hit that number and sign up. After that, the window closes. This expedition system is clearly Embark testing long-term progression resets without forcing them on players. Totally optional. High risk, high reward. And that pretty much sums up Cold Snap as a whole. This update isn't about content spam. It's about pressure, environmental danger, meaningful choices. Do you push through the storm or play it safe? Do you reset for long-term power or keep what you have now?
PlayStation 4 Pro, arriving as it does mid-generation, means that our target is to take the whole PS4 experience to a new level, and to do so without the kind of disruption that moving to a new console generation would entail.
You mentioned taking the PS4 experience to a new level, so tell me a little bit more about what you mean by that.
So for game content, the new console is targeted primarily at higher fidelity graphics and smoother frame rates. And these are great areas for us to focus on because they don't alter the fundamental gameplay. The creator's vision is just represented in a richer fashion.
All right, let's slow this down and really unpack it, because the PlayStation 6 story isn't about specs yet. It's about timing, pressure, and a bunch of invisible forces that are quietly shaping what this console can even be. January is the key month here. Not because Sony is announcing anything publicly, but because this is when early engineering samples reportedly start coming together. This is the phase where hardware stops being a PowerPoint slide and starts becoming something developers can actually touch. And once devs get their hands problems on early silicon, everything changes. Performance targets become real. Bottlenecks become obvious. Sony can finally start tuning the experience instead of guessing. That lines up cleanly with the rumored release window. Holiday 2027. No delays assumed, which sounds far away, but in hardware terms, that's basically tomorrow. Now here's where things get messy. The entire industry is currently getting squeezed by memory prices, and not in a prices went up a little way. In a this could dictate console design way. Nintendo is already feeling it. Reports say the Switch 2 is seeing RAM costs jump by over 40% in a single quarter. NAND prices are climbing too. That's not noise. That's a warning, because consoles live and die by long-term component pricing. Memory is one of the biggest costs in the box, especially when you're talking about fast unified memory. And PS6 is absolutely going to want a lot of it. This is where all those memory rumors start to matter. You've probably seen the numbers floating around. Early chatter talked about 40 gigabytes. More recent leaks suggest something more grounded, like 30 gigabytes for the main PS6 and around 24 gigabytes for the handheld. Xbox Magnus allegedly sitting higher. Whether those numbers are exact almost doesn't matter. The takeaway is this: memory is the hardest part to lock in. If RAM prices stay high, Sony has two options: eat the cost and push the console price up, or get clever. Compression, cache, custom memory controllers, smarter software solutions. Sony has always leaned toward the second option, and honestly, that's where their advantage usually shows. But memory pricing isn't the only problem. Manufacturing is the other half of this puzzle. For years, TSMC has been the gatekeeper. Best nodes, best yields, everyone wants in. AMD, Nvidia, Apple, everyone. And that creates two problems: limited capacity and insane pricing. That's why the Samsung and AMD 2-nanometer talks are such a big deal. If Samsung can actually deliver competitive performance and yield, it gives AMD and Sony leverage, not just on price, but on volume. And volume is what prevents console launches from turning into disaster scenarios where no one can actually buy the hardware. Now, let's be clear, this isn't copy-paste manufacturing. You don't just move a chip design from one foundry to another like dragging a file onto a USB stick. Different nodes behave differently. Power, clocks, thermals, all change. So even if Sony does pivot, that's months of tuning and validation, which again brings us back to January. This is when those decisions start locking in. Now, look around the industry and you'll see the same story everywhere. Valve announces new Steam hardware but stays vague on pricing. Why? Because RAM prices are unstable. Storage prices are unstable. And Valve does not want to announce a box, then immediately walk it back. Then you hear the Half-Life 3 rumors. Supposedly close, supposedly tied to new hardware. And again, supposedly delayed, not because the game isn't ready, but because the hardware math isn't settled. Whether you believe that part or not, the pattern is obvious. Hardware decisions right now are fragile, and this is where Sony might actually be in a better position than people think. Sony doesn't wing this stuff. These contracts are negotiated years in advance. It's entirely possible Sony locked memory pricing before the latest spike, especially with how predictable the AI-driven demand surge has been. If they did, that's huge. That's how you launch a PS6 without shocking everyone at checkout. Because let's be honest, if PS6 launches at $600 with strong specs, people will complain online and still buy it. If it launches at $800 or more, that becomes a real problem. Not because Sony is greedy, but because perception matters. And Sony knows that. This is also why I don't buy the idea that Sony is just blindly chasing the biggest numbers. They're chasing balance. Performance per watt. Performance per dollar. A console that developers can target easily, and that can be produced in massive volume. So when you hear rumors about Zen 6 cores, RDNA 5, ray tracing close to high-end PC cards, take it with perspective. Sony doesn't need to beat a $3,000 PC, they just need to embarrass it on value. That's always been the play, and memory prices are the wild card that could either enable that or force compromises. So yeah, January matters. Not because of trailers, not because of announcements, but because this is when the PS6 quietly starts starts becoming real. And the big question isn't how powerful will it be? It's this. If memory prices don't stabilize, does Sony hold the line and get clever? Or do we all need to mentally prepare for a next-gen console that costs more than we've ever seen before? That's the generation-defining question right now.
We've been working on some seriously cool gaming tech with Sony, and I couldn't think of a better person to walk us through it than my good friend, Mark Cerny.
All right, that being said, this is where Sony absolutely shocks the industry. Not with brute force, not with look how many teraflops we have, but with tech that fundamentally changes how consoles use the power they already have. Because while everyone's arguing about memory prices, node sizes, and launch windows, Sony has been doing what Sony always does best, working quietly with AMD for years, laying the groundwork for the next leap. This partnership isn't new. It didn't start with PS5. It didn't start with PS5 Pro. It goes all the way back to PS4 in 2013. That's over a decade of Sony and AMD co-designing gaming-focused hardware together, not just slapping off-the-shelf PC parts into a box. And now, we're finally starting to see what that long game has been building toward: Project Amethyst. That's the internal name for the shared R&D effort between Sony and AMD. On the surface, we've already seen the early results. PSSR getting better, FSR getting better, Sony sharing training data, AMD feeding that back into its own upscaling tech, a feedback loop. But that's just the warm-up. Mark Cerny and AMD's Jack Hu didn't just talk about software tweaks. They revealed 3 core technologies that are being designed together for the future of gaming hardware. Not patches, not features, foundations, neural arrays, radiance cores, universal compression. And once you understand what these actually do, it becomes very clear why PS6 isn't just PS5, but faster. Let's start with neural arrays. Right now, GPUs handle machine learning in a very clumsy way. You've got lots of small compute units, each working on tiny chunks of data. That's fine for traditional rendering, but it's inefficient for AI tasks like upscaling, denoising, or frame generation. Neural arrays flip that model. Instead of each compute unit working in isolation, neural arrays allow multiple compute units to gang up on larger AI workloads together. Bigger data sets, smarter collaboration, less overhead. Why does that matter? Because PSSR and FSR are both machine learning based, and this means future versions aren't just faster, they're cleaner. Better reconstruction, better stability, better motion handling. Frame generation improves too, not just in speed, but in image quality. And here's the quiet part most people miss. If AI tasks get handled more efficiently, that frees up the rest of the GPU. More bandwidth goes back to shaders, to lighting, to geometry. You're not adding power, you're reclaiming it. And because neural arrays lean heavily on software optimization and compiler behavior, this is one area where PS5 and PS5 Pro could actually see improvements over time through firmware and SDK updates. Now, let's talk about radiance cores. This one is huge. Right now, ray tracing on AMD hardware runs through general compute units. Those same units are also trying to render the game, run shaders, manage effects. Ray tracing math is insanely expensive, so everything gets bogged down. Radiance cores change that. They're dedicated hardware units built specifically to handle ray tracing math, ray traversal, path tracing, all the nasty, heavy calculations that usually cripple performance. This tech is derived from AMD's neural radiance caching, but here it's taken to the hardware level, and the knock-on effect is massive. When compute units no longer have to babysit ray tracing, they're free to do what they're actually good at: complex shaders, higher frame rates, more detailed worlds. This is how you get closer to true next-gen lighting without sacrificing performance. This is how 4K, high frame rates, and advanced ray-traced lighting can coexist instead of fighting each other. PS5 and PS5 Pro probably won't get radiance cores. This is a hardware-level change, but cross-gen games will still benefit. Developers can design lighting models for PS6 and then bake simplified versions into PS5 builds. You still get a visual uplift, just without the full real-time calculations. Now for the least flashy, but arguably most important piece: universal compression. Memory bandwidth is the silent killer of performance. Your GPU can only work as fast as data can get to it. Sony already tackles this with delta color compression on PS5 and PS5 Pro, but that's limited mostly to textures. Universal compression blows that wide open. Instead of compressing only specific asset types, universal compression evaluates all data passing through the memory bus: textures, geometry, shaders, everything, in real real time. That means more data gets through the same memory bus without increasing bandwidth, which is exactly what you want when memory prices are exploding. And the benefits stack. Higher resolution textures without stutter, faster streaming, larger worlds, even potential 8K output paired with aggressive upscaling. Not because the hardware is brute forcing it, but because it's wasting far less. And just like neural arrays, parts of this could trickle down to PS5 and PS5 Pro at the software level. Better asset handling, better visual stability, better efficiency. Now here's where this all clicks together. Neural arrays let AI workloads scale efficiently. Universal compression feeds more data through the system. Radiance cores handle lighting without choking performance. Together, they don't just add power, they multiply it. And this is the key philosophy shift. Instead of throwing more compute units at the problem, Sony is designing around efficiency. Less wasted silicon, less wasted power, cooler operation, lower TDP, fewer thermal bottlenecks. That matters a lot when you're trying to ship tens of millions of consoles worldwide. And yes, none of this is ready yet. Cerny and Who were very clear about that. These technologies are still being validated through simulation. No final hardware, no consumer demos. But companies don't publicly hype tech like this unless the results are promising. And that's the point. We've hit a wall with raw horsepower. The jump from PS4 to PS5 already showed that. The days of massive visual leaps from pure power are over. The next leap comes from smarter use of power. And that's what Project Amethyst is really about.